How's it going, everybody? And welcome to episode 5 of the Limit Breakers podcast. This installment will be our first ever mini episode, a feature we're going to do more of in the future, during which we want to catch you up on the state of the show and recommend some hidden gem type games for you guys to check out. So without further ado, let's get going. Welcome back, guys. It is Memorial Day weekend. We are here on Sunday recording another installment of the Limit Breakers podcast. I am Cameron, and I am joined once again with the full gamut of hosts today. How's it going, guys?
Awesome.
Good to be back.
Before we get into any of the super awesome gaming stuff, how has your weekends been, and just in general? I feel like people might want to know that we have existences outside of.
Yeah, I would describe my weekend so far as barely lucid.
And it's completely thrown me off my game on a response that I could possibly give to say how my weekend actually is. But I would say that I'm doing pretty well. It's good to be back after having a week off from the Dota episode, which I heard went pretty well.
It did, yeah. No, I mean, I had a lot of fun doing it. I hoped Andrew and Michael would be good guests, and I felt like they were. I felt like we got an equal mix of stuff that was funny to listen to again and actual content that might help somebody out. So did you have a similar feeling, Steve, or did you despise them coming on, or?
Well, I think it goes without saying that I despise everything they do. But having said that, I thought that much of what they said and recommended on that episode was less despicable than other things they would say.
I am in absolute agreement. Now, the reason we're actually doing what I called a mini episode today, really, there's a number of reasons for it. I mean, we'll get into a little bit about why we. But the number one aspect is actually that we had some technical difficulties with an episode we were going to do last week that we recorded. Things kind of happened. I'll take full blame for them. I know I had posted we were going to do 2 episodes. We only got to 1. But we'll tell you a little bit more about that after we tell you about what we've been playing recently. I will actually start off because I keep harping on the fact that I'm playing the same games, but I guess in reality it's only been a couple weeks. But I've continued my trip down SNES memory lane on the 3DS. I've moved on from Super Metroid to actually Donkey Kong Country, which is a very, very fun game. I've played on a couple of iterations, and really I think I'd play it even if only for the underwater music called Aquatic Ambiance, which in my opinion is one of the greatest music tracks in any game ever.
Would you say that it rivals the underwater music of the first Mario N64 track? Do you remember what I'm talking about?
I remember incredibly well, actually, and that sounds actually awesome as crap. That and Dire Docks from Super Mario 64.
Yes, well done.
Some of my favorite music from that game, and yes, it's of that same caliber. So that gives you an idea. Fun game. It's a game that I don't think it needs a whole lot of introduction. It's a old SNES platformer. I'm playing on the the 3DS, and it's kind of a nice palate cleanser. It's a really relatively short, relatively easy game that I want to play before I get into something else a little bit crazier. So, and on top of that, before I move on, I did wake up today to multiple Amazon deliveries simultaneously of PSP games I picked up because I got the system and didn't want to feel like I had made that investment without actually getting a library. And it was kind of funny to literally see like 6 games appear like I was awoken to the actual dog barking as 2 different delivery people brought 6 games. So I now have a nice little personal collection that'll probably take me quite some time to play through, but it's nice to have it nonetheless.
Huh, wonderful. So as far as my own experience in gaming has been going recently, I can officially announce that I'm a Twitch viewer. I never used to follow Twitch, but I have in the last few weeks, specifically this past week. I've been really interested actually in the release of Overwatch and just seeing how it plays out as a game, as a phenomenon. And I suspect it will become a very competitive field actually in the near future. But it's also been hilarious just to become more acquainted with, I guess, the Twitch demographic, if you will, and the dynamic, just because, I mean, like, literally one of the biggest, like, dramas on Twitch the past, like, week has been, so T-Pain has actually been playing Overwatch, and, I mean, to his credit, he's not, like, a terrible player, he's all right, but a lot of, like, the really quality, like, Twitch guys, streamers, who are playing Overwatch are just, like, super PO'd that T-Pain has taken all their views, and so it's certainly been interesting to walk into that climate. As far as Overwatch as a game goes, and I don't currently own it, although I've convinced one of my good friends actually to buy it just so I can play it. But as far as watching it has been going, pretty entertaining, really, really interesting game. It's a little bit more I would want just a few more RPG and I think MOBA elements in it than is there, but it is a really good start, and it's just seeing how much the different character classes, the different heroes opens up in terms of strategic play and play too actually has been really fascinating.
Yeah, I'm actually really glad to hear you say that, because I think going through not only doing the last episode together, but then listening to it a couple times, I did realize how much I missed anything team-oriented that we used to play together, whether it be the three of us here or Andrew and Michael included even. There was something that was really magical and just generally fun about games where we could kind of try to improve as a team, start from the ground up on things. And a lot of the games that we used to play are either sort of dead now or we've sort of played to our limit. So it would be really kind of cool to move on to a new game like Overwatch together. I know we've talked just in passing about doing it, so I think that's a real possibility, and that could be something fun to talk about on the show if we do. But I'm glad to hear you have interest too, because it's definitely something I want to check out. Justin, can we convince you to do that?
Well, at the very least, I'll come over and watch, if you will. No, I'm just kidding. That was terrible. I deserve to be shot for saying that. But yeah, I will be purchasing the game as soon as possible. Looking forward to playing it with you guys because it's been quite some time since we've all played a game together. But for me, recently, it's been like a back to basics type week where going all the way back to playing Super Mario All-Stars for the Wii, playing the classic Mario games, and just realizing how difficult like those original games are. I mean, you have games now with much more complex control systems and things like that, and to go back to one of the first games that most of us probably played, and just realize like how time consuming it can be and how many times you have to restart a level is kind of surprising to me. Just I didn't really expect that going back in. I feel like after all the years we've been gaming that I would be better at those early games, but I'm not. So
would you say overall that going back to them kind of reaffirms their importance as games? Can you see why they were so important and that are still so relevant now, or do you kind of not like them the way you used to?
Or would you say it more reaffirms your own self-perception as a horrible gamer?
Well, the latter certainly, but also, I feel like I did better at those kinds of games growing up because of, I guess, of the replayability and kind of learning where everything is and getting developing that whole learning curve. Whereas now, like, games are so fast paced that you don't really get to the time to necessarily like sit around and like explore a lot.
Yeah, that's a very fair point, and definitely something I've noticed in my own excursions into retro games. But I guess before we get into what we kind of wanted to talk about relatively briefly today, I do just want to go over real quickly what we were planning to bring you last week in the episode that we recorded that got deleted that I believe we're going to try to recreate in the future. It was an episode which touched on storytelling in gaming, not only how storytelling has evolved, but also how storytelling in gaming kind of compares to other media forms, television, movies. And I really liked some of the stuff we touched on. I felt like maybe in the future when we do it, I could do an even better job of sort of making the history of the development of storytelling in gaming a bit briefer. But a lot of the points we referenced were really interesting to me. So if you listeners out there are interested in hearing about that, I do think, I guess I can ask you guys right now, but I do think we want to do that again in the future and maybe even have a more informed opinion when we do. Does that sound good? Or
I think, honestly, it would be a tragedy to deprive our audience of me waxing philosophical about that. I think just that was one of my better moments as a I have many, but certainly one of the better ones.
And yeah, for me as well. I mean, I opened the episode with an Academy Award-winning, tearful monologue from Final Fantasy VII, and I feel like the audience would be remiss to never have heard that. So I think we need to get that on the air.
Well, you read it with an affect about as flat as a pancake, but if that qualifies for Academy Awards, then I absolutely agree. But no, it was a very powerful intro. I do long to hear that again. But that's the episode we were going to bring you. Unfortunately, it didn't happen, but we will bring it to you in the future. But in its place, we did get the Dota episode out, and now we're bringing this to you, which is our first ever mini episode. Now, real briefly, we want to talk about why we're doing more mini episodes in the future, and how will a mini episode, besides being a little bit shorter in length, differ from our main episodes. Now, I think the reason these could be kind of interesting is because between all of us, there's a list of games and topics that's so lengthy at this point that it's unrealistic, at least right now, to really think we could touch on everything that we want to touch on. And even some of the stuff we want to touch on isn't necessarily good or conducive to spending a full hour discussing it, either because the game lacks the substance to get into for an hour, or because as a group we don't have enough to say about it for an hour. So I think these mini episodes are going to give us a chance to touch on some stuff that probably wasn't deserving of an hour of content, and also, just like in the case of today's episode, talk a little bit more casually just about the podcast itself, sort of the state of things, just because I don't want too much time to pass in between us sort of touching base with you guys. So I think these will serve as a nice kind of point of reference, in the middle of a bunch of other episodes, and just let us mix in some miscellaneous stuff that probably wouldn't fit elsewhere. So today was a good one, I think, because, especially with the long weekend, we're all sort of relaxing anyway, taking a little break from stuff, but also because we're 5 episodes deep now, and I felt like it'd be a kind of a fun time to look back on our first 5 episodes, talk a little bit about what it's been like for us, the feedback we've gotten from you, and just, take inventory of stuff. So as a general question, maybe this is a loaded question, but have you guys enjoyed doing the podcast thus far, and how has it maybe differed or been exactly like you expected it to be? Is that a fair question to ask?
Well, I mean, it's totally not fair at all, but I'll answer it nonetheless. I came into this, the podcast not having a huge variety of titles in common with the two of you, but I've been kind of surprised at the amount of things that I have had to say about the games that we've played, and also looking forward to moving forward, just playing some games that I probably would have never actually played had this podcast not actually occurred. So I'm very excited for the potential that future episodes may hold for me in growing in the video game world, as it were.
I think my own experience has been very interesting, primarily because, first of all, I had never really listened, certainly never done a podcast, but never really listened to one before I did this. But now that I am doing it, I'm really realizing that it's a type of service to humanity. I think that people need our opinions, especially my opinions, on the gaming world and what's out there. And I think the world would be much less if it weren't for this podcast. So I would, definitely different than what I expected, but a necessity for humanity.
Yeah, I mean, some of our first pieces of feedback, I think, basically intimated exactly that they didn't so much feel like they wanted to listen to it as much as they had an existential need to experience it.
Undoubtedly.
So in that regard, I'm very glad that you're doing this service to humanity. I know I've enjoyed it, but Steve Moore feels compelled to do it, which is fair. We all have our own reasons, but
we all have to make sacrifices.
We do indeed. And I'm probably the most qualified, simply out of experience having done it now, to talk a little bit just about the actual behind the scenes aspect of producing this. We kind of jumped into this head first, really out of a genuine interest in doing something like this, but without very much experience, as Steve mentioned, in doing a podcast and using other podcasts as a real kind of reference point. And thus far, it's been a ton of fun. It's been a steep learning curve in terms of really kind of improving our content, improving the sound of our podcast, getting it out there. But it's been incredibly rewarding to see people's reactions, to see people sharing it, to see people giving feedback, to know that anyone's actually, I remember the first time someone posted a comment and said, is your new episode out? I want to listen to it at work. And just the concept of someone sitting at the night shift at work listening to us talk about, it was probably the MMO episode, it was such a funny idea, but also a very rewarding one. That's, I think, what we were hoping to do from the get-go, is just put content out there that people could genuinely, turn on, and for that hour or whatever it is, just kind of kick back and kind of think about games and enjoy the idea of them the same way that we always have. So to know that that's happening at all is really already gratification enough for me. But we do want to keep growing this, I think, and we do want to challenge ourselves moving forward. We want to try to branch out a bit more. We want to try to gain momentum and we'll talk at the end a little bit about what we're going to do to try to continue doing that. But yeah, on the whole, I've really loved doing it. I'm so glad you guys agreed to do it with me. I think things have gone really great. It's in the early going. It's not so much about crunching numbers or the listener statistics as much as it is just, as long as we're having fun doing it, I think we're going to keep doing it for at least for the near future. And hopefully in time, listeners will come with that. But if they don't, it's a fun hour each week to get together and talk about some stuff that I like talking about anyway. So thank you guys for doing it. I'm glad you're enjoying it also. And I guess without further ado, we'll get into some actual gaming content so you guys can have something to rattle around your brains the rest of Memorial Day weekend. But so we want to do a quick segment where we just introduce some games that are sort of hidden gems to you guys that could be fun for you to check out, or maybe you're already aware of them and it'll just kind of be nice for you to hear about some treasured favorites of your own. But why don't we take a second here to just introduce some of them and explain why people might want to check them out. Did you want to say something, Steve, before we get into the recommendations?
Well, I'm ready to get right in, personally. I mean, I don't see any reason why I shouldn't start, right?
I mean, I had you queued up, so take it away.
All right. Will do. So I'm ready to jump in here because there's two particular games I'd like to talk about today. One is more of a mainstream, recently released mobile game called Battle Hand, and one is a classic game that was actually released on Sega CD called Popful Mail. And I think they're a really interesting contrast, both really interesting games in their own right. But the first one, Battle Hand, is a mobile game that would probably be considered, I think, an incremental RPG. And because we did lose a storytelling episode, I haven't really been able to define for you guys what that means. But I think incremental usually denotes a game that is more, that progression is more based on time than perhaps narrative or plot. That might be a little bit crude, might do an injustice to some games, but I think it's true to a certain extent. And Battle Hand is a game where classic RPG combat, turn-based, mixed also with elements of what I would really say is a type of card game like Magic the Gathering, and that I've really come to love, actually. Very fun to just kick back when you have a few minutes here and there, and you need to satisfy that urge to get more powerful, but also feel that playfulness of the luck factor that comes in with a type of card game element. Anyway, check it out. Very fanciful graphics, very enjoyable, and it also has a very cool PvP element as well. I think it's one of the better examples in the mobile market of an incremental RPG out there. The other game that I would strongly recommend our listeners check out is, again, a classic game called Popful Mail, and it's a side-scroller RPG, and it's really maybe it's not fair to call it. I think it is an RPG. I will call it a side-scroller RPG, and it's just has a very compelling plot, actually, despite being a side-scroller, which is, I think that's a somewhat rare thing, and has truly endearing cinematics, has really cheesy but inevitably enjoyable dialogue, has pretty cute graphics. It's actually very difficult to sum up, but the side-scrolling gameplay is really enjoyable. You have some basic special moves that you can use that's limited by a certain ability gauge. You get to change armor and equipment, and you have a few different characters you can use. And so there's a certain level of customization and progression that's the hallmark of any RPG. But it really is an adventure. As far as the Sega CD games go, I think is like no other.
Yeah, I have incredibly vivid memories of going over Steve's house when we were young just to watch him play it because, for one, I never owned a Sega CD, so it was the only chance I get to see it played, but also just because it was, at the time, a very eye-opening game in regards to the level of customization. I'm sure other people at the time that were more familiar with the goings-on of that console generation had played other similar games, but I really hadn't seen many like it. So, yeah, the anime-style cutscenes, the combat across 3 characters, the equipment, everything was just very interesting to me. And I remember just being enthralled enough to sit there and basically try to get into your house for the sole purpose of being allowed to watch you play it.
I think we've all done that for each other a few times, really just coming over for not really to see that particular person. But it's okay. It's okay. It's the life of a gamer. And Yeah, and I do just want to echo. I remember being hooked on that game from the very first cinematic, even before the gameplay started, when you have a bounty hunter who is chasing down this one guy who actually, she thinks she gets his head when in fact his head explodes on her. And it's rather comical, but really enjoyable, and very much sets the tone of what the game is.
Now, the one thing that might make it difficult, because I think that's a wonderful recommendation, it's a tremendous game, and I think the type of game that is popular enough that it's going to have some traction when you mention it to people, but certainly unheard of enough to really be a fresh recommendation to a lot of people, is actually the rarity of that game. And we both sort of like laughed looking at each other about how valuable, especially the complete inbox version of Popful Mail is now.
I really wish I had realized that before. Like I don't even know what I did with it.
The ballpark, if I had to guess, I think like a good condition complete inbox is probably $500, $600, $700 now. I think the disc alone is probably $100 to $150. But there are obviously, we're not endorsing, less than savory ways of playing these old games, but just know that there are ways if you don't want to shell out $700 to play it.
I guess probably just an emulator, probably.
I mean, yeah, I didn't say that. Steve did. But Justin, you want to go next? Or you want me to get into my little spiel here?
I'll take over. So I want to talk about another Sega game, but this is a Sega Genesis. Talk about a little game called General Chaos. And basically, as you might imagine based on the title, it is a strategy game. And it came out in 1994. And basically, you have the plot of the game is very simple, as you might imagine for that time period, where you have two generals, General Chaos and General Havoc, and you can play as either side, and you're trying to overtake the other enemy's city. So basically, this game is, you can play against the computer, or you can also, there's a multiplayer aspect to it as well. And you, in larger scale battles, have a squad of 5 people made up of a guy who has a bazooka. There's a guy with a flamethrower, a guy who launches grenades, another one who launches dynamite, and a gunman. So in that game, you can take over and pick which character you want to play and do close range combat or long range combat. You can hide behind things, stuff like that. It is really fun to do the close hand to hand combat. I think we all have kind of stories of doing that when we played each other in 2-player mode. And I think it was the first game where you actually got to punch someone in the nuts. So if you're ever just feeling vengeful and angry, it's a good nut punching game.
Justin does frequently.
I do many a night, and it's a really enjoyable game. I think it's one of the first. I guess would you call it an RTS maybe for that time period?
Yeah, no, I think that's fair.
So it's like it's probably the first RTS that I had played, at least especially for that platform, and it's very enjoyable. It's not a complicated game. So if you're looking for something that's very easy and laid back, I would check that out. I was disappointed to know that when I was doing some research about the game, just refreshing my memory on it, that in 2013 they had done a Kickstarter for a sequel to the game, and it fell about $100,000 short of its goal, which I was pretty disappointed about because I did enjoy playing that game with many of my friends.
Did you personally donate to that Kickstarter, Justin?
Well, I just found out about it today, so I did not.
I see. You
but
didn't.
Had the creators contacted me, I would have financed the entirety of the game.
Again, I just want to remind you that your stinginess actually knows no bounds.
The two things I remember from General Chaos, because like I mentioned with Steve, I do have very fond memories of playing General Chaos with Justin, is that the flamethrower guy, because when he'd flamethrow you, like the majority of the time, you'd just turn into a skeleton and immediately die.
That is true.
And nut punching was incredibly OP. I feel like
accurately so, nut punching is always OP.
I do agree. So I guess in that way it was very realistic. But essentially, when enemy units would run into each other, you would enter sort of a rock paper scissors little fist fight where you could attack someone in the head, the body, or the nuts. And I feel like if you just punched in the nuts over and over repeatedly, it almost didn't matter what the other person did. You almost always won. So I would just hold down, press A over and over and over, and inevitably you'd eventually win. So I don't know if that was a bug in the programming or just me having horrible memories of the way the game played. But
no, I remember that too. I feel like whoever kind of landed the first blow, and if it was a nut shot, then you basically automatically like.
I really did learn a lot about life from that game.
I still have the sound of just the audio voice acting of the person getting stuck in my head even to this day. So, but I do highly recommend that. It's actually a really fun game. That's one of those games where there's relatively little depth to it, but somehow we had fun with it for a ton of time. And the kind of game that if you're in the mood for sort of a campy RTS game with some really funny scenarios and really funny characters and animations, it's a really great one. Anything more you want to say about it, or is that sort of general chaos in a nutshell?
I think we've kind of said all we can say about it. Although I would love to spend much more time talking about it, but
I mean, I'd personally like to enact general chaos right now.
That's true.
Fair enough. Well, I am going to talk about the game Alundra, which is a game that I actually really put a lot of thought into doing a review on personally a long time ago, and was a game I was really interested in doing maybe an episode on in the future. But as I mentioned earlier, we all play so much stuff individually. There's relatively little carryover sometimes between what we're playing. So rather than invest all that time in trying to get these guys to dive into this, I thought it best probably just to talk about it here. Alundra was a game that came out in 97 for PlayStation. It is, a lot of people compare it to A Link to the Past. It's a very Zelda-esque game in that it's a top-down action-adventure game. But the thing that sort of sets it apart for me, and the thing that I love so much about it, is it's kind of A Link to the Past through like a rated R, kind of really dark, really creepy lens, which I like anyway. I really like when gaming, you know, not so much outright horror games, but I really love games that aren't afraid to have a very adult, very mature and complex atmosphere, as opposed to, you know, you think of things like Nintendo, you think of very family-friendly, fun, cuddly, colorful gaming, but sometimes it's nice to go to the other end of the spectrum and play games that aren't afraid to deal with some more questionable or more, you know, intense subject matter. And in this particular game, you play the titular, whatever, how the hell you say that word, character Alundra, who is actually a dream walker, which means he's able to enter the dreams of people for the purposes of trying to actually stop the nightmares they're having. So he goes to this town that's experiencing all these horrible nightmares, and essentially the game is spent going one after the other into these people's dreams to figure out what's plaguing them. And it gets into this crazy quasi-religious, quasi-spiritual thing where they're all being plagued by this ancient deity, and you gotta, you know, explain the full story would be a lot to say, but it's just such a cool, you know, to give you an example of how dark it gets, there's like children's who like get brutally murdered by having their necks snapped off. There's people burned alive in their houses. It's like, it's not afraid to go to some pretty dark places, and yet on the surface,
it sounds like the Game of Thrones version of A Link to the Past.
Exactly. I mean, in a certain sense, it really is. But you know, on top of this dark, really cool story, the controls are fantastic. If you like that A Link to the Past play style and control system, it's like that, but just refined a bit more. The soundtrack's awesome. The soundtrack's incredibly moody and incredibly catchy. I still think of the central town theme. The town's called Inawa in the game, and every time I think about that game at all, that theme just pops back into my head. Another big hallmark of it's an insanely challenging game. It never feels completely unfair, except for the ice puzzles, which if you've played the game, you'll know what I'm talking about immediately. That's enough to pull your hair out, but it's that kind of challenging where you genuinely feel rewarded when you beat something, not because it's unfair and it takes a lot of luck to do it, but because it's designed in such a way that it really is gratifying to finally get through something. So, you know, I guess to sum it up quickly, if you're into Zelda-style games, really just the PlayStation era in general, or games with more mature and dark themes, highly recommend Alundra. It's a great control game. I mean, it really just holds up really well now because the graphics are really crisp. Sort of has that old classic art style that still looks great now. So if that's up your alley, absolutely recommend it. You can get it on PSN. I think physical copies they're not crazy expensive, but they're a little bit pricey, probably around $50. So PSN's probably the way to go if you want to check it out and enjoy it.
I also want to ask one, just a follow-up question unrelated to the specific games we just talked about, but I'm in the market right now for buying one of the newer consoles, probably Xbox One or PS4 myself, possibly. We'll see. Still making up my mind. But one thing that will affect that decision, I'm curious. So a game I recently loved on the PC was Divinity Original Sin. And as many of the listeners here probably already know, there was an enhanced edition that came out not only for the PC, but also for the consoles. I have not yet played that enhanced edition, but I'd be curious just to know from any of our listeners who have played it, A, does playing it on a console really change the experience enough to feel like a different game? B, would it be worth really jumping back into that game, even I have already played through it at least once? I mean, I think it is a type of game that's worth replaying, but how significant a change is the experience? Any type of feedback I could get on that would be really helpful for my own decision making going forward.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and really cool to hear that you're looking into an Xbox One or a PS4. Obviously, I'm a lifelong Sony guy, so I would recommend the PS4, but I think in this day and age, it really just comes down to what exclusives you want. You know, both systems are powerful. Both systems have large user bases. It's which exclusive games matter more to you. In my case, it's usually been Sony, but obviously other people that want their Halos, they want their Gears of War, they want, it really just depends on what you're looking for.
I think my dilemma, honestly, is I really prefer the Xbox controller setup, but I'm much more faithful to Sony gaming-wise, and also because I know that one game I really want to look into coming out, I think within the next few months, will be Paragon, which is a really re-envisioned MOBA game that looks really exciting. But I know that's only coming out for PS4, at least in the beginning. So we'll see.
Justin, any plans to get a new console in your future? Or are you still a Sega Genesis guy through and through?
I think when the new version of the PS4 comes out, I might look into getting that. But for now, I mean, I'm content with owning the PS3. I think, and
is that the 4K PS4?
Well, I mean, I don't have a 4K TV, so
then why would you get it, you asshole?
Fair enough.
No, I think it really is an important point to mention these days that console prices and just everything that goes into owning one is prohibitive enough that if you're not going to play enough games on a new gen console, there's really not a whole lot of reason to feel compelled to get one. I know as kids, the second the newest thing came out, we'd all be in line the first day to get them. But now it really is a matter of there's stuff you want to play for it and you feel like you have the money and want to do it, more power to you. If not, it's not like when you were a kid and if you were the one kid that didn't have a PS2, you were ostracized. It's sort of whatever tickles your fancy these days. But before we wrap up, I do want to do a couple quick shout-outs and then talk a little bit more about something that we've sort of skirted around but never really talked head-on about. The shout-outs are actually primarily to Master of None Gaming. We shouted them out previously, but they've continued to support us so much. They've been sharing our links. They've been commenting on all of our stuff. It's just so cool that people of like mind are really taking to our stuff and, really becoming sort of pseudo friends of ours. So maybe at some point in the future we could do some kind of crossover type thing. It's just in general been really cool to see their support so much. It really means a ton. I hope you're really enjoying it as much as you're illustrating online, because that would mean a whole lot if you were. So thank you guys so much. Any shout outs you guys want to do before we talk a little bit about the YouTube channel?
Well, I would just like to say that because it is a holiday weekend, that I'm sure many of you guys are going to family events, and what better way to spend that family event than by being on a portable console, because that's what I used to do all the time when I would go to family events. So beat a couple games while you're out there and eating some hot dogs or whatever it is that you're doing. I would also like to give a shout out to Jinx.com, which is a gaming clothing company. I own a few of their things, and it's fun to walk around with a shirt that says "Living Your World, Get Owned in Mine," among other things that I own.
I was actually going to say that Memorial Day weekend is one of the few excuses to, if you want to get away from gaming, it's one of the few free passes I'll give you. Is I'll let you off the hook if you want to take a couple days off gaming. But Justin does make a fair point. I mean, why not sneak in a couple games of Smash on your 3DS in between trips to the keg and the old hot dog grill? But if you want to spend the next couple days doing some actual fun stuff and getting some actual sunlight, we won't hold it against you.
Yeah, and I just want to make a shout out and a congratulations actually to T-Pain for being I think non-controversially the worst Twitch streamer I've ever seen, and really just diminishing the value of Twitch as just a larger community in the most significant way I've ever seen anyone diminish it.
Does T-Pain now rank pretty highly amongst the professional gamers you want to emulate, or is he pretty far down the list?
I would dispute calling him a gamer personally, but we can let that be for the moment.
I mean, I think you're neglecting the fact that every one of our listeners is a huge T-Pain fan, and so with that statement, our whole fan base has just dissipated.
If we found that to actually be true, though, would haunt me to the end of my days. But yeah, maybe it could be. So yeah, real quickly before we head out, we again have been incredibly glad to see people subscribing on YouTube. Not only because we want to eventually hit 100 subs so we can get our own URL, but because I really am interested in doing this giveaway we've been talking about, which is when we hit 100 subs, we're able to make a custom URL on YouTube so we can actually give you a YouTube place to check out each week instead of just saying, look for our YouTube on social media. But in order to celebrate that, I want to give something away from my personal gaming collection to one of our subscribers when we hit that mark. Now, I haven't decided what it's going to be yet because it's going to depend on a couple of things. I guess in part what people want, but also, I want some time to really build something cool, build a prize up before before that date. But just know that it will be something substantial. It's not going to be like we hit 100 subs and I send you a sticker in the mail or something. It's going to be something that I really want to genuinely thank people for helping us reach that mark. It's going to be, likely a treasured game from my collection or something else cool. So if the idea of helping us get that URL is enough to make you subscribe, awesome. If the idea of maybe winning a giveaway is enough to make you subscribe, that's awesome too. And then I think we'll also, when we hit 100 subscribers, do a full episode, whether it be video or audio, of doing nothing but answering listener-submitted questions, which could be a lot of fun to do. So that's 3 good reasons for you to subscribe. Please do if you have the chance. It really helps us out a lot. And like I said, it's kind of nice to see us growing in subscribers each week. Now, before we head out, do you guys want to say any last words or just...
have a good Memorial Day weekend, and look forward to sitting in and doing the next episode.
Thank you as always for listening. Although really, you're welcome for enlightening you with everything we have here.
So for Justin's game recommendations, Steven's incredible hubris, and my questionable hosting skills, we are the Limit Breakers. We'll be back soon with another good episode. Thank you guys as always, and talk to you soon.